Nearly 1 in 10 homes in the United States are worth $1 million or more, a record high. Buying a home in this economy is becoming a lot harder for first-time buyers, which is something that I'm sure you are aware of if you are a first-time buyer, according to a new real estate analysis. The Wall Street Journal reports that about 1 in 10 homes across the country has a value of $1 million. The increase is due to record high home prices in the US. In June, the median house sale rose to $442,525, according to the brokerage Redfin. And this is bad news for basically everyone except someone who is actively looking to sell their house as soon as possible and move from an expensive area over to a cheaper area. If you're looking to buy a home, then it's not good news for you because the prices are up. And if you currently own a home, it's also not good news for you because your property taxes are going to go up. And property taxes going up is even more of an issue when you consider the fact that insurance rates are spiking all over the country, specifically in places like Florida or California, which are much more susceptible to natural disasters. So the report itself is not particularly great, but it also has some interesting things to note. So this is the original report that Redfin, which is a large real estate data tracking company, put out. Record 8.5% of homes in the US are worth $1 million or more. Despite high mortgage rates pushing down demand, historically low inventory keeps pushing home prices up, and therefore their values. That's good news for homeowners, sort of, but challenging for buyers. Nearly 1 in 10 homes, 8.5% in the United States, are worth $1 million or more, the highest share of all time. That is up from 7.6% a year ago and more than double the 4% share before the pandemic. And here is a graph. As you can see, it goes over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, like 1.8% were over $1 million. And now, 10 years later, it's basically 7 or 8 times that amount. It's not quite proportionally as bad as it was in 2022 when we had the absolute peak, but I mean, this graph is a bit unfortunate. Now, I know my titles sometimes border on something close to clickbait, but I do try to back up everything I say with data and not fear-monger things that I don't need to. But I do genuinely believe that we are in a housing crisis, and so do a lot of people that are a lot smarter than I am. As you can see from this Yahoo article, we're passing through the worst housing affordability crisis ever seen, former housing secretary says, and it isn't going to fix itself. Home prices and rents skyrocketed during the pandemic-fueled housing boom, and mortgage rates subsequently soared. Because mortgage rates shot up from historic lows so suddenly, people stopped selling their home. And because the country is underbuilt by millions of houses, the sales halt didn't stop. The housing market has cooled down since. Home prices aren't increasing exponentially, which they were before. Mortgage rates are lower than the 2-decade high reached last year, and rents are generally flatlining, and inventory has picked up. And that's good news. Still, everything feels very different than it was before the pandemic. We're just coming through the worst housing affordability crisis we've ever seen in this country, Sean Donovan, former U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama era and the chief executive of housing nonprofit Enterprise Community Partners, said in an interview with CNBC on Tuesday. We've had an 18% year-over-year increase in rents, home prices rising at levels we've never seen. So we are seeing some leveling off, but it's at a level that is well beyond what folks could afford. He continued, this just isn't going to turn itself around. We have too little housing in this country, and we've got to build more. Donovan later put that the housing shortage was between 5 and 7 million homes, but estimates vary. And I think I've seen other estimates from more people saying it's closer to 4 million, but that is still a tremendous amount of underage to have in this country. The most interesting part of this being that even though the price of housing, as you can see, there's like an 18% year-over-year increase, I think that was like 21 to 22, even though the price at which housing costs are growing is slowed down, they are still growing. So if your income has not caught up to that amount, then it's just too bad for you because those housing prices are continuing to grow. Even if they're growing at the same speed as your income is now, they grew so much faster than your income before that it's still unaffordable. Now, this article doesn't really give specific data outside this 18% number, but I'm gonna do that, but right after I ask you, if you like these kinds of finance videos where I deep dive into various topics, please give me a subscription. I'd love to see you around here on some other videos I post 2 or 3 times times a week. And this is the median home price as tracked by Redfin. House hunters are having trouble committing because buying a home is more expensive than ever. The median home sale price rose 4% year over year to a record $442,000, which is the number we just saw earlier, in June. And the average interest rate on a 30-year mortgage was 6.92%. While that's slightly down from 7.06% a month prior, it's still more than double the all-time low hit during the pandemic. And with the median income for a household being about $75,000, this puts the cost of a house to income ratio at basically the highest it's ever been. And this is tracked by this website Long-Term Trends. It says home price to income ratio, and as you can see here, this is how much a home costs. The higher it costs and the lower the income, the bigger the number will be. So in general, if you're looking to purchase a home, a bigger number is worse. It's bad. It's like golf. And as you can see here, just before the 2008 housing crisis, where everything was going absolutely nutty, and then of course prices for houses crashed, so relative to the income, the home prices dropped, and now as you can see here, they are going back up. And not only are they going back up, they are skyrocketing to basically the highest rate they've ever been since the Fed has been tracking both home prices and also incomes. And this graph means that whatever your income is for the average American, the median income, so about $75,000 per household, a house is costing about 7.7 times that amount, which is absolutely absurd. Hello to the kitty. Now, I know I say this every video, but not enough homes are being built in places that people actually want to live and the type of homes that people actually want to buy. And this is primarily because of three things: NIMBY laws that keep construction projects out and prices for local homes higher, zoning laws that don't allow things like duplexes, triplexes, or more condos, apartment complexes, and so on and so forth, and also inflation, because building materials and also the salaries of the people at the construction companies have gone up, and so those companies, in wanting to make a profit, have had to raise their prices even more than that. And places where homes actually are being built, they're too expensive to be good for first-time buyers. Average price of a new construction is pretty hard to get an average on, but it's something like between $300,000 and $500,000. That's far above what most first-time home buyers in their late 20s or early 30s are actually able to afford. And as bad as this sounds, there is actually some hope, because possibly for the first time in the history of the United States, a politician has put forward a plan that might actually be good and be able to fix the problem. And I know, I am just as surprised as you are. You might be familiar with it. If you're on more liberal-leaning news sites, it's hailed as like the greatest thing in housing since houses were invented. And if you're on more right-leaning news media sites, it's probably been hailed as the worst idea ever and will increase inflation across the board. It's very biased. I suggest you read it yourself and discuss with people who know more about economics. But here is the brief. Fact sheet: President Biden announces major new actions to lower housing costs by limiting rent increases and building more homes, calling on Congress to pass legislation giving corporate landlords a choice to either cap rent increases on existing units at 5% or risk losing current valuable federal tax breaks. Repurposing public land sustainably to enable as many as 15,000 affordable housing units to be built in Nevada, and also rehabilitating distressed housing, building more affordable housing, and revitalizing neighborhoods, including Las Vegas, Nevada. And then somewhere around here, he talks about the Biden-Harris housing plan would build 2 million homes and provide a $10,000 mortgage relief to unlock home ownership for millions of Americans. Already, more units are under construction than at any time in the last 50 years. I wouldn't take that at face value. I'd fact check that. And the rate of new housing starts is up 17% compared to the last administration. Again, that's worth fact checking. I don't know where those numbers are from, and no sources cited. But basically, this is a two-part plan. First, he plans to limit increases for people that want federal tax breaks. So this is not a law saying that you're not allowed to increase rent. It is a law saying that you may increase rent as much as you like, but if it's more than 5%, then you lose out on federal tax breaks. And the second part of the plan is to build more homes. Now, most people say, and most economists say, that rent control does not work. And that is true. And by and large, I'm not disagreeing with them either. But this isn't necessarily rent control, because you can still raise the rent. You just lose the federal tax benefits. Additionally, this rent stopgap of no more than 5% is a very temporary measure while we build more houses. This is not a blanket for the rest of time you can't raise rent by more than 5%. This is while we build more houses and bring the prices down for the average person, rent cannot be raised. It's a quick band-aid fix while they work on the larger issue. Don't get me wrong, rent control isn't good. Most of the data I've seen, aside from some studies out of New Jersey, suggest that rent control in the long term does more harm than good. But that's the key. In the long term, it takes years for this kind of damage to take place. And this plan only plans to have rent control for a very short amount of time while the houses are built. It is a bit extreme, and I don't think it's the ideal solution, but frankly, I'm happy that someone is actually just buckling down and doing something instead of just pointing across the aisle and blaming the other side for all the problems. Now, that's Biden. As for Harris, if she becomes president, or Trump if he becomes president, it's a little more complicated. I know Harris has proposed giving like $25,000 to first-time home buyers, which, to be clear, would drive prices up, but because it's only for first-time home buyers, it won't drive prices up by that $25,000. So more than likely, if you're a second-time home buyer, houses are going to get more expensive for you. But if you're a first-time home buyer and you're able to qualify for this $25,000 grant, then home prices will become cheaper for you. The long-term effects of that plan can both be debated and will probably be studied years after the administration. As for Trump, it's hard to say what he would do if he was president. His administration hasn't released any kind of official, this is how we would fix housing prices. He's talked about inflation more generally with things like tariffs and immigration, but he hasn't talked specifically about housing prices and how he plans to bring those down. So it's kind of hard to say, but my best guess is that it would have something to do with getting rid of regulation so that houses are cheaper to build from a budgets and permits perspective. However, whichever side takes office, the other side will absolutely do everything in their power to make sure that they can't get anything done. Thanks for watching.